as I was starting to say, I'm really excited to be here with you and really be able to share what my passion is. It's getting people healthy and dealing with pain through promotion of health. And so that is basically what I have spent my career doing. I've been doing this for over 30 years. Right now I'm at the University of Washington. In the past I was at the University of Arizona. And I am practicing in pain medicine, but doing so with a focus on health. And microbiome, as we now know, is very much a key to our overall health. These are the learning objectives for today's talk, and you can review those at the end of the talk, and hopefully I will have met those objectives. So I want to start off with the work of Metchnikoff. Metchnikoff was a brilliant man who got the Nobel Prize in the year 1908 for his work on cellular immunity. And he co-shared that with Paul Ehrlich that year, who came up with the science behind humoral immunity. And those are the two main factions of immunity. But Metchnikoff also had a very revolutionary idea at that time, and that was that there are good and bad bacteria in our gut, and that they are the key to our health and to our prolonged life, our longevity. He also at that time even predicted that there would be fecal transplants in the future. This is a little quiz. What has a profound effect on inflammation, the immune system, and our mood, but is not a drug? What has 10 times as many cells as us and 200 times as much DNA as us? Well, it is the microbiome. And it is that mass of microbes that is in and around us, but most of it is in our gut. Now, there are 5 pounds of microbes in us. So that means that next time you step on the scale, you can automatically take 5 pounds off because that's them, not us. We have 1 trillion bacteria and microbes on our skin, 10 billion in our mouth, 100 trillion in our gut. And there are 500 to 1,000 different species, and 30 to 40 of those species make up 99% of the total of our microbes. It's a very, very diverse and robust community, and we'll talk about that more later. So even Time Magazine's gotten into this. Why is your DNA not your destiny? So what really does determine our health, and how does the microbiome interconnect with that? How does it communicate with our immune system? How does it determine inflammation and pain? What's going on here? So when we look at these two genetically identical mice, so these are clones of each other, but clearly their phenotype is very different than their genotype. So the one on one side is obese, and the one on the right side of the screen is not obese. And when they do an analysis of their microbes, they're different. And if you do a fecal transplant, from the fat mouse to the skinny one and the skinny to the fat, they change and they become the other phenotype. So the phenotype is determined not by the genotype as much as by the microbes in the gut. And this is another example of a genetically identical, these are agouti mice. So the one on the left-hand side of the screen that looks like it has the same hairstylist as Donald Trump, that one is the mother mouse, and that tends to be the body habitus. That is the body habitus of the agouti mouse, and it is a model for insulin resistance and diabetes, type 2 diabetes. And so there she is. She is obese, she is diabetic, and she is orange. And the daughter that she had on the right-hand side of the screen is, as I said, genetically identical to her. But during pregnancy, this mother mouse was fed B vitamins. And what came out was a little brown mouse who's not diabetic and is not obviously not orange. So genotypically was much different. So again, that was something that was changed through nutrition. So mediated again through what goes on in the gut. But what's really interesting here is that when that small brown mouse is bred again without giving her vitamins, her babies will be brown and small and non-diabetic like she is. So that clearly tells us that our inherited DNA is not our destiny. It is epigenetics that changes things. So epigenetics modify gene activation. They turn genes on and off, and they change gene expression. And clearly the agouti mouse showed us that they are heritable, so you can pass them on to the next generation without having any change in the actual structural DNA. And these are changes that happen because of environmental factors. And this really gives us a huge window into how can we change health? How can we change our destiny? And now we have some questions to poll you on. And Leah will put those up.
Great. So let's start with poll number 1. And while I'm launching this poll and letting people vote, we'll give you about 20, 30 seconds. I think, Dr. Tick, I might have figured out the video thing. So do you want to try turning your video on again?
Okay.
I hope I figured it out, but if it doesn't work, then that's okay too.
Okay, what do I do?
At the top of your screen where you have the mute, you should say, or maybe it's at the bottom, start video, and just click on that.
So I don't see a Zoom screen. Let's see.
Okay, press escape if you can, or okay. I'm going to end the poll in a few seconds while Dr. Tick is just opening this up. And if it doesn't work, that's okay too. Yeah, click on that.
So I've got Zoom US up at the top, but it doesn't, start video?
Yeah, there you go.
It says I can't. It says my host has stopped it.
Huh, okay. Well, I thought I'd turned it on, but I'll try again. Anyway, let's end the poll now. We'll go back to your screen sharing. And I'm going to share the results of the poll while Dr. Tick is sharing her slides again. Sorry about that. Thanks for trying anyway. Okay, so here are our results.
Okay, so that's very interesting. And certainly you do get much better uptake from patients who are interested. But sometimes I'm surprised that people who seem to come into my office very intent on a particular form of treatment, often opioids or procedures, because those are what are most commonly advocated as being the most useful in our culture, whether or not that's true, and actually it isn't true. But I will mention it to them anyway. And now I do have to say, I mean, I do appreciate that rarely there's not enough time. I am with you on that. It's very difficult for a lot of practitioners in certain settings to get enough time to do it. I'm in a very fortunate setting in that we do have more time with our patients than is considered standard. And so I do mention it to everybody, but I don't push it unless people are interested in the change. So genetics really accounts for approximately 20 to 30% of our health outcomes. I don't know why it's doing that. And lifestyle accounts for 70 to 80% of what happens to us in our health outcomes. And so that is extremely important for us to know because we have a lot of control. Now, let's get back to the specific topic of what's happening here. Now, what's happening here is that this baby is getting exposed to a microbiome that is not personally her own. She is getting a diverse microbiome experience. And there's a lot of literature that now shows that there is a tremendous benefit to having diversity. We know that, again, in cloned mice experiments, there's a lack of diversity of microbiome, of the microbes. And there are there's a decrease of a particular type called Bacteroides and an increase in Firmicutes bacteria and actinobacteria. And we've also seen this in children. The same pattern follows. If in obese children that bifidobacteria are decreased, Firmicutes are increased, Staphylococcus and Enterobacteria are also increased in obese children. And, you know, it really is unfortunate that we didn't listen to Metchnikoff back in 1908, because back then there were far fewer things that interfered with the microbiome as we know it today. So now we have antibiotics in our food. We have antibiotics widespread in medicine. We have all sorts of different chemicals that damage the microbes. We have pesticides. We have high sugar in our diet. We have a refined diet. Now we know that food does influence microbe differentiation and diversity extremely in us, and food does really determine what our microbes will be. And what we're seeing is that there are decreases in the diversity of the microbiome in present populations. But overall, we are what we eat, what we ingest, digest, and absorb. So we're kind of responsible for ingesting, but as soon as we ingest our food, we actually start to digest it and process it. And the microbes, starting with our mouth, are very, very involved in that process. So we have the genome of the microbes to also utilize for our own benefit. And that's something that's just being recognized. So we've talked about epigenetics, but the part of the epigenome, the genome that isn't our own that we get to use, comes from the microbes. Now, we eat 85 to 90% of our carbohydrates in the US and Canada are high glycemic, which means they spike our sugar faster than sugar does. And most of the bread, rice, the boxed cereals, the potatoes actually do exactly that. And we now actually have to be quite careful with rice, especially brown rice, which is considered lower glycemic index, but it contains a lot of arsenic, which is a problem. Also damages the microbiome as well as is a neurotoxin. Now, in Canada, 1 in 5 Canadians live with at least one of the following chronic diseases, and I'll let you just read those. 2/3 of all deaths every year are caused by these chronic diseases. It gives you an overall increase in the burden of disease, and more than 65% of our healthcare costs in Canada and 75% in the US go to chronic disease treatments. Just think of what we could save if we could deal with chronic disease. Okay, poll number 2.
Great. I'm going to launch poll number 2. Here we go. All right, I'll let people vote. Give you about 20, 30 seconds.
Now, certainly each of those are a factor, but what is the most common factor that we find in our culture?
Looks like about half people have voted, so we'll just give a few more seconds. Don't be shy, don't worry, it's completely anonymous. So if you're not sure, just put whatever you think. Okay, give a few more seconds here. Great, I'm gonna end the poll now, and here are the results.
Okay, so everybody has thought poor diet, and absolutely that is the common denominator in North America at this point. So I want to talk about this study, which is one of the landmark studies showing the impact of not smoking, exercising moderately. What they asked for is half an hour a day of moderate exercise, could be a walk, didn't have to be vigorous in a gym. A healthy diet, vegetables, fruit, beans, low meat consumption, some wine was allowable, some chocolate was allowable, but this is the basic diet, and a BMI of under 30. So 30 is the cutoff point for obesity. And what they found was that you could prevent this amount of disease. This is huge. Think if we could prevent 93% of diabetes. Heart attacks are still the major cause of death. And yet part of that will be caused by diabetes. And so those do overlap tremendously. It's hard to distinguish those two, but even 36% of cancers. And this was only in just over 7 years of observations that they could do this. And this was in over 20,000 people in the test group, and double that number in the control group. So this was a huge study that was done. And if you followed them, what would happen if you followed for 15 years? Cancer is a disease that happens over many, many years. Could we prevent 70% of cancers? There's actually data from the 1930s in a very landmark but forgotten conference that was held in Germany in 1936, a very pivotal time in their history. And after the conference, there was obviously world turmoil, and the findings were forgotten. But the findings were that 70% of cancers are caused by the environment. And that was at a time when the environment was a lot cleaner than it is now. So I'm just going to briefly go through some of the missteps we've taken when we've given advice on diets. So this was the food pyramid that was popular for so many years. It's very heavy on the grains, and it really minimizes the use of healthy fats and oils, doesn't distinguish between healthy and unhealthy ones, and doesn't distinguish between refined and unrefined grains. And this led us to decades of diabetes, heart disease, hypertension, and to the obesity epidemic that we have now. And there was never any evidence behind this. The two nutritionists who worked on this project both wrote books, and both of them said the same thing. Everything we recommended was disregarded, and these were business decisions that the USDA made. This is the older version of the Canada Food Guide. This is actually still a pretty current one. And they still have milk and milk alternatives. And what they talk about mostly with milk alternatives, they do have fortified soy there, but elsewhere in their writing, they talk about cheese and yogurt being milk alternatives. When you look internationally at the world, most of the world does not consume dairy products into adulthood. Past infancy, most countries, most civilizations don't consume milk. There are a few exceptions to that. And then, yes, there is cheese and there is yogurt in some cultures, but again, most of the world doesn't even use those. So why is milk considered obligatory in North America? And so you have to look at the numbers of servings and what they're doing. And certainly in this one, they've gotten vegetables. They've prioritized those. And I'm glad they put vegetables in front of fruit. So that's also a good thing. So this is a good step in the right direction. When you look at what happened in the USDA, and the USDA they do influence what happens in Canada. So they came up with My Plate, which was an improvement, a little more in vegetables, but vegetables and grains are still equal. And then they say at least half the grains should be whole grains. And again, they have dairy there, obligatory. And yet, with only half the grains needing to be whole grains, that means that Twinkies can be the other half. And this may explain why, because their vision statement is to expand economic opportunity through innovation. Farming is not considered innovation. This is the Canadian version of the plate. It looks almost as though vegetables and fruit are half, but they actually aren't. If you look at it, the pie shapes on the right-hand side are actually wider than the vegetable one. And we still have milk there. But good for them. They put in water, but fats are very minimized. So when we look at the impact of diet in shaping the microbiota, there was a very interesting study done on Italian children consuming a Western diet. Now, Italian children consume a very different diet than the North American diet. And they compared them with a group of children in Burkina Faso, which is in rural Africa. And what they found was the Italian children had more gram-positives, which is Firmicutes, which are, of course, the bacteria I mentioned that is associated with obesity. The Burkina Faso children had high fiber and a vegetarian diet, and they had more Prevotella. They also had a greater abundance of gram-negative bacteria, the Bacteroides. And they also had less autoimmune disorders and less diabetes, multiple sclerosis, Crohn's, asthma. There's an interesting theory called the hygiene theory, showing that we've taken cleaning to far too extreme a case. We think that by sterilizing everything, by nuking our food, exposing it to things that kill all bacteria, it gives good shelf life, but it doesn't give good human life. It doesn't give us good quality of life because it destroys the bacteria that are supposed to be part of our microbiota. And so if you look at maps of the developed versus the developing world, and they're on the WHO website, and you can see differences in terms of incidence of multiple sclerosis. And you can see that it identically overlaps the world maps looking at infestation by helminths. And so we're glad that we don't have to deal with helminths, and it may not be that the helminths are actually what's healthy for us in the equation. We're certainly hoping so, but it is possible that they are a marker for just a more robustly diverse microbiome, and that is what is conferring health. So in areas where you have higher MS, you have lower incidence of helminths, and vice versa. If you have low risk of MS, you have increased risk of having helminths. And so this greater microbial richness and diversity also translates into higher levels of short-chain fatty acids, which heal the gut. And those are produced by the microbes in our gut when we feed ourselves with fiber. So high fiber diets are really good for our microbiota. And this is the study, and these were the conclusions of Lionetti. I'll just read it. Healthy bacterial populations living in the gut may not just exclude disease-causing bugs. By pumping out beneficial compounds, they may actively help to suppress disease. So diet rapidly changes the gut microbiome. And that was an article in Nature that you can look up. And there was a study that was done in a population, again, from Africa and one in Germany, and they were adults, and they swapped diets for 2 weeks. They checked their microbes beforehand and after. And after they started adopting each other's diet, they very quickly were morphing their microbiome into that of the other part of the study. And now we have poll number 3.
Okay, here we go. Poll number 3. Do you want to just read the questions out, perhaps, Dr. Tick? Let people go for a few seconds.
Okay. Why do your patients struggle to make changes in their diet? Do they lack motivation? Do they not know how or where to start? Are they confused? And do they think it doesn't make a difference?
Okay, I'm just going to give a few more seconds. Got about half people have voted. Again, it's anonymous, so don't worry. Okay, I'm going to end the poll now, and here are the results.
Okay, they don't know how to start. I agree with you on that. I think I'm with that on most. Yes, there are some people who will not be motivated, so you're right on that. And yes, you know what? They don't think it'll make a difference. When I start out my conversation with people, I use a quote that came from my book, which is, you change your body chemistry every time you eat. You either increase your inflammation or you decrease your inflammation. And then I pause, and then I ask them, what do you think it means if I increase your inflammation, or if you increase your inflammation? And they all get the right answer to that. They say, well, I have more pain. And that is the case. So if you can motivate your patients by telling them food is information, you either increase or decrease inflammation based on what you eat, And if you're like the average US person, and Canada isn't far behind that on average consumption, it's not quite as bad as the US, but it's not far behind. 150 pounds of sugar a year, half a pound a day. That is disgusting. A 20-ounce soda in the US, and I actually haven't looked up the stats for Canada, but I think Canada is pretty consistent with the US on this. In Europe, it isn't the same, but in Canada, in the US rather, a 20-ounce soda contains 16 teaspoons of sugar. In Europe, it's 11, and in other places, it's even less. So is this the information you want to give your body? We know for a fact that this meal increases your risk of heart attack and stroke, mediated through the gut, through the microbiome, by increasing inflammation. And what that does is it basically lights a fire in your immune system. And yes, it's going to increase body-wide acidity, and all of that is going to increase your cellular, your free radical damage to cells, damage the integrity of cells, and it also has a huge impact on your mood. So this is a very different scene. There is a little bit of meat tucked in there somewhere, but there's all sorts of yummy, wonderful food. There's also chocolate there that they don't show, but I talk about dark chocolate all the time. There's good, healthy oils. There's a little bit of wine. There's lots of wonderful, yummy foods. There's some pasta. There's some lots of unrefined foods in their natural state. You want food to be coming from the farm, not from the factory. In the factory, they have a chance to mess with it, even if it is exposing it to radiation in order to give it better shelf life. That is going to destroy the microbes. So the greater diversity of the microbes, the better you are in terms of fighting off disease. And so even Mayo Clinic proceedings, which is pretty mainstream medicine, is getting into the act of recognizing the importance. And as I've mentioned before, there's an impact on obesity. So these are chemicals that damage your microbiome. Sugar is at the top of the list, and we're eating way too much of it, and we're also eating too much of the processed foods, which turn into sugar quickly. So some people think, well, okay, aspartame and sucralose, those are the solutions. Well, aspartame turns into methanol and then formaldehyde in our body, and sucralose is a chlorinated pesticide. It's a sugar molecule with chlorine. And it's been shown that the chlorine actually gets absorbed in us, and that's very, very highly toxic. Antibiotics, we also know that aspartame and sucralose, because they're so super sweet in their flavor, they actually stimulate the insulin response so that we become insulin resistant, even from aspartame and sucralose, which are the things that are popular to give for the condition of being insulin resistant. Antibiotics, of course, damage microbes. Pesticides do. Carrageenan and certain other food additives have been very poorly studied. And so carrageenan we thought was good. It came from seaweed, but then they started putting it into everything to texturize everything. And if you check labels, you'll see it's been in a lot of foods. It's been shown to damage microbiome. And so we are starting to see food manufacturers take it out because people are trying to avoid it, people who become aware. Proton pump inhibitors. Those are the very powerful stomach antacids that everybody is on for heartburn. And they are extremely damaging to the gut and to the microbiome, because we need stomach acid to sterilize our food, kill the bad bugs, allow the good ones to survive, and that also helps to stimulate digestive enzymes, which then enables the microbiome to do its proper work. Non-steroidal anti-inflammatories damage the gut and have been shown to do so, and they have been shown to kill a lot of people. In the US, they have done studies on this, and they've shown that in the US they kill 17,500 people every year. That is more people in the US than die from HIV and cervical cancer put together. There are many other medications, and all the toxics, the heavy metals and the petroleum products, plastics, all those things are damaging to the microbiome. This is some of the data on the non-steroidal anti-inflammatories. Even if people are asymptomatic, they have a very high chance of having small bowel intestinal damage from those drugs. And annually, we kill a lot of people. And that study was just done on patients with rheumatoid arthritis and osteoarthritis. So think about everybody else who takes non-steroidal anti-inflammatories. That's the drugs like ibuprofen and the prescription versions of them. There are tens of thousands, there's millions of people that pop these like Tic Tacs. The proton pump inhibitors have attracted the attention of the FDA, and they've put a warning on them. There are profound magnesium deficiencies, B12 deficiencies. All of those things also are causes of pain. And antibiotics are, this is an interesting thing, that increased risk of getting Crohn's disease, new onset Crohn's, right after having a course of antibiotics. So our food choices easily increase or decrease our inflammation. And so what we want to avoid are the wrong fats, sugars, refined grains, and processed foods. The World Health Organization has also noted that industrialization has dramatically changed how we grow our food, and that it is making a very negative difference, having a negative impact. Glyphosate is one of the most ubiquitous pesticides, and all of the genetically modified foods, most of them, I should say, are Roundup ready. Roundup is glyphosate. It's a very, very toxic substance, and it is starting to be banned in different countries. There are countries that will not import our foods because of glyphosate. And World Health Organization has taken the position that factory farms are not sustainable, and that what we need are small organic farms with biodiversity, both for the health of the earth, but also for the health of the people. And again, that is going to improve the biodiversity of our microbiome. We can have a calorie surplus and a micronutrient deficiency. And that's mostly what happens in the hugely obese people that we're seeing more and more around the world. So the highest incidence is in the US, but we're exporting our food habits, and we are exporting that pathology. So let's talk about a few things that can help condition the microbiome. Turmeric is a wonderful anti-inflammatory and analgesic, and it has an amazing impact on the gut. It heals the gut. The fiber in turmeric gets digested into short-chain fatty acids by the microbes, and that basically allows the gut to heal itself. There are many studies on turmeric and pain, and I'll just leave you, you'll have those references to read later. Quercetin is a flavonoid, and it is also known for a very broad range of anti-inflammatory effects, and it can be a very wonderful anti-inflammatory. It is especially good for healing after injury, so athletes love quercetin. And there are some mechanisms here that are outlined in basic science literature that we don't have yet enough literature on this to state categorically that we have double-blind placebo-controlled studies, enough of them to do systematic reviews, but it's very, very promising and very promising mechanisms in play. So microbiota accessible carbohydrates are part of some of these natural foods that help to fight inflammation and help to decrease pain. And these are called MACs, and these are digested by our microbes. So let's just talk a little bit about food and mood. So lining the gut is 80% of the immune system, but also enough neurons for a small mammal's brain. And that's very significant because we have a brain in our gut. Now, we often say in the pain business that no brain, no pain, because all pain is processed through the brain. But we also have this brain in our gut. We probably have another small brain in our heart. We certainly have gut feelings and heartfelt feelings. And so it's important to recognize those connections. And we still have a lot of science that needs to be done on those connections, but it's very, very promising. And so what you eat affects your mood. That we know for sure. you can cause depression by having people eat sugar. You can improve depression by having people eat vegetables. And you can influence, therefore, pain as well. And I have to tell you, in my practice, people come back to me constantly after trying my plan for 1 to 2 months. They'll come back and they'll say, I didn't really believe you, but you were so enthusiastic about me making these changes that I tried it. And I have to say, I feel better. I sleep better. I'm less moody. I have less pain. I have more energy. And sometimes they'll say I have the same amount of pain, but boy, I feel so much better. And I've cut my drugs by a significant proportion. So it does make a significant difference on people's mood and feeling of well-being. And now we're starting to look at using probiotics for depression, and the psychiatry literature is getting in on it. So that's a good thing. So my bottom line for my patients, what I send them home with at the beginning, and I don't always send everybody home with the same thing. It isn't one size fits all for the reasons that you have highlighted in answering the poll questions. Everybody starts at a different place. You have to make it significant for them. You have to negotiate with them. If you have somebody who regularly eats 2 vegetables a day because they don't have time or they think that's all they need, that's very different than if you have someone, and I've had patients like this, who drink, a liter of Coca-Cola and 5 donuts. That's their breakfast. And they don't understand why I think that's a problem. They eat fast food for lunch and for dinner. And when I talk to them about a vegetable, they look at me like I have 2 heads. So you need to start in a different place with those people, but you can work with them. And I have turned some of those folks around, and they've started to become cooks of their own vegetables and get into it. So people can change. So these are the things that I like to start with and really get people to be committed to. The no soda one is one of the only things that I really try and take away from people first, because it is so damaging. I tell them to go home and read the label and tell me if anything on that label sounds like food to them, and tell them all the things that soda does. I use analogies. I say, well, if you have any extra Coca-Cola left or soda left, it's pretty good at cleaning the toilet. And colas are also really good for dissolving the corrosion that's on the battery terminals in your car. And that usually gives them the idea that it's probably not health food. At any rate, we have one more poll for you.
Great. Okay, I can launch that. That's poll number 4. And as I'm launching this, I just want to say we've had some really great questions. So thanks for that, people. You're welcome to add a few more questions if you like as we're taking the last poll. And I'll give a few more seconds for people to vote. And Dr. Tick, I did check with Zoom support. Unfortunately, there's some sort of system error on their end. So nothing we did wrong. But anyway, I apologize to everyone. We couldn't show Dr. Tick. But we do have that lovely photo of her. So yeah, okay, great. I'm just going to end the poll in a few more seconds and let Dr. Tick speak to the results here. There we go.
Okay, well, I'm with you. All of the above, absolutely. If I have to start with one, I will start with diet. Sleep is extraordinarily important. Stress, absolutely. All of those things. And all of those things actually affect our microbiome. One little factette that I absolutely love is that as part of the signaling mechanism in our body of nighttime happening, of our diurnal rhythm, the microbes move by 2 millimeters. And by exposing a different part of the bowel to different microbes, suddenly the body has yet another signal that, hey, it's time to go to sleep. So it really does make a difference. And stress, of course. And stress is, as I said, there's a major connection between the bowel and the microbiome and stress. And we're seeing so many people, so many children with ADHD, with anxiety disorder. Anxiety disorders were never this prevalent, but it's rare to see somebody who doesn't have one or know of a close family member who doesn't have one. And I think a large part of it is due to the gut, because I think us as an organism, we know we're being attacked from the inside. Okay, So let's proceed with questions. Now, if I stop sharing my screen, I won't be able to, you still won't be able to see me, right?
Oh, I was on mute. Sorry. Can you hear me
Okay.
now?
Now I
You
can
can
hear you.
leave the slide open. I think that looks great.
Okay,
If you
good.
like, you can click on Q&A and open those up. But I'm going to start by reading out a question that I had myself. And it was about when you spoke about brown rice and you said something about arsenic. Would you be able to tell us a little bit more about that?
I sure can. I'm going to go back to sharing because I don't have a Zoom screen anymore. I can't even look at questions. I'll do current slide. Okay, so it's been shown that all rice, other than wild rice, has some arsenic in it. Apparently, rice concentrates arsenic from the soil. And in North America, we have been using an arsenic-containing food for our chickens. So it's an antibiotic. It's supposed to sterilize them, not sterilize them, but get rid of salmonella or reduce the incidence of salmonella, even though at this stage in North America, you have to assume that all chicken and all eggs contain salmonella. That's according to our regulatory agencies. And so they feed them this stuff called roxasone, and it has arsenic in it. So we then use that. I mean, the chickens go out, they poop, the arsenic comes out. It's in their meat as well. It's in their eggs. But their leavings get used as fertilizer, and then we get it more of it in our rice. And so it's really become quite a problem. Brown rice apparently is worse than white rice. So there is a way, I think I've got it on my website. My website is www.heathertickmd.com. And I write a blog on there. And I think I've got on there the way to cook rice safely, but we can't steam our rice anymore. Those rice cookers are going to need to be a thing of the past because they just concentrate the arsenic in the rice.
Oh, interesting. We had one more question about wild rice. Would it be the same for that?
Wild rice is not the same, so wild rice is fine.
Okay, great. I also did share your website with everyone in the chat if people would like that. Okay, great. I'm going to ask another question. We have a lot of good ones. Someone is asking if you could clarify your remarks around the WHO map of MS prevalence. And I think you mentioned a word that sounded like helminths. I'm sorry, I'm not familiar with that myself. And I think some other people might be new to that term as well. So could you tell us more about that?
Okay, so helminths are parasitic worms. So for those of you who've remained on the call and not been totally grossed out by what I just said, parasitic worms are very common in the developing world. And we have basically all but eliminated them in the developed world. Now that we have so much travel, we're starting to see them back in the developed world as well. And some of them cause problems, major problems, and some of them don't. And again, so the map of where you find helminths to be very endemic, which means the population, almost all of them will have them, are also the areas where there's very little multiple sclerosis and autoimmune disorders. So that's what that was referring to.
Okay, thanks. I just threw a quick link for everybody because I wasn't sure how to spell that either. So maybe you can take a look there. Wow, okay. Another question is about radiation. How do we know if food has been treated with radiation, and are there any regulations for listing this on labels?
That's a very good question. It was hotly debated whether or not they could radiate food without telling us. And I think in the US, in the way that they always side with, or mostly side with industry, I think, and I'm not positive, I think it is allowed. I don't know about Canada. In Europe, it wouldn't be. It depends on the stringency of labeling guidelines. And so that's something that I need to do some further research on, and I'm not sure.
Yeah, good question. We'll have to look into that. I'm just going to skip to this one. It's a little bit longer. So how do you tell your patients who are on NSAIDs? So this person feels very strongly that NSAIDs are a major factor in creating gut inflammation. But the problem is that many people in pain are being prescribed NSAIDs because they are non-addictive.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe you can speak to that a little bit.
Okay, so, and this is an important one. Non-steroidal anti-inflammatories actually cause inflammation in the gut. They disrupt the tight junctions, which gives you increased gut permeability, or also sometimes called leaky gut. It is now permissible to discuss increased permeability in the gut because it's now become mainstream. So, in the old days when I used to talk about leaky gut or increased permeability, standard doctors would roll their eyes and really think that this was fictional. And yet it's now been shown to be a thing, and a significant thing.
Thank you. Wow,
So,
it's hard to pick from so many good questions.
no,
Sorry.
I just actually want to continue because this one really is so important.
Oh yes, please do. Sorry about that.
Because I just stopped to take a drink rather. Because the NSAIDs damage the gut, they increase body-wide inflammation. So there's a rebound from it. And people, when you tell them this, will start to recognize it. They'll say, yeah, I take one, and then I do have to take the next one because I feel worse, actually, when it starts to wear off. And so tell them about turmeric. Turmeric is the replacement for NSAIDs. And go to my website. There's tons of stuff on turmeric there. And I'm done.
Okay, thank you. Sorry, I jumped in there.
Okay.
No, you're right. That was a very important question. Thanks for asking that.
Video, it would be different, but so I'll say over when I'm done.
Sounds good. Okay, I'm going to ask another question here. Some people are asking about specific amounts of turmeric and, sorry if I'm pronouncing this wrong, quercetin.
Mm-hmm.
And they're wondering what foods particularly quercetin is in.
Quercetin is very, the way they derive it is from onion skins. So it's in onions in general. So onions and garlic and that family will have some quercetin in it. But if you want more concentrated amounts, save the peelings from your onions and boil them down, add them to stocks and to foods that you're cooking. You'll get good amounts of it there. And so I usually recommend getting 1,000 milligram pills of quercetin and taking 1 to 4 a day for recovery from activity, or just as an anti-inflammatory and pain reliever. So that can be helpful. Turmeric, when you read the large studies, the systematic reviews, so systematic reviews are collections of many studies. And when you read those, what you see is a trend that you get some positive results with doses below 1,000 to 2,000 milligrams, but they're not as robust results, and they aren't as consistent results. Once you get into the 3 to 4 grams a day, that's 3 to 4,000 milligrams per day, you start to get very, very consistent, good results in terms of what the studies are showing. So that's the level I recommend for my patients. I like them to start with golden milk, which, and again, recipe is on the website. And that way, it's the Ayurvedic way of taking turmeric. That way you can take a large amount of it quite simply, very inexpensively, and it's just made with turmeric ground spice. And it can be quite palatable, and I've got some ideas on the blog that tell you how. And use that as your gold standard. So once you see how good you can feel on that, then you can vary your dose. You may need it at that level, at the initial level, which is about 4 grams a day. You may need it that way for a month or 2 months or 3 months. And then you might find that you skip a dose and it doesn't make a difference. So then you can lower your dose until you find that you're at the current dose that you need now. And then you can transfer to taking pills for convenience. I certainly do that when I travel. But you just end up taking more pills. That's all. So it has a nuisance factor of its own.
Okay, thank you. We've had a few questions actually about pills. So someone was asking if they're allergic to onions and garlic, could they take quercetin in pill form? And someone else is saying if a person is allergic to turmeric, what would you recommend?
Turmeric allergy is a difficult one and a sad one for me because it takes one of the major components out of my armamentarium for helping people. Sometimes people can start with tiny amounts. If people can eat mustard, so that's the test question. There's small amounts of turmeric in mustard. If they don't respond badly to mustard, they should be able to take a small amount of the food of turmeric. But some people are truly allergic and cannot take it. So ginger is a pretty good replacement. Ginger is probably not quite as anti-inflammatory. The neurological benefits haven't ever been looked at with ginger and may or may not be there, may be there in a much lesser degree, so they weren't as noticeable. But we've noticed that in societies that consume a lot of turmeric, the incidence of Alzheimer's is either non-existent or very low. And now it's being studied formally for dementias. So there's a benefit to nervous tissue. And since we know that no brain, no pain, that may be part of the factors that it also affects in terms of improving